You're listening to the Adventure Party for the 1st week of July 2023. This week, an all new edition of the Adventure Party. Wait, where did all these trenches come from? Do I hear cannons? Is this war? The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and animated gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the Adventure Party, edition 750 something. We've had a few changes, haven't we?
Longest running traditional gaming podcast.
Is it? Is it the
I think we are.
Oh, we're doing pretty well. Or the most, yeah, probably are. They hadn't invented most of the gaming that we see now when this started. They hadn't really invented us either. It is I, Savage Mick, joined by
Warlord Scar.
And I'm on.
And we are going to talk about Edition Wars. That sort of gnarly thing that sort of pokes its head up above the parapet into the no man's land of user opinion every so often. We're just going to talk about it generally today. I think we can all bring to mind an Edition War we were veterans of. But I'll throw to you first, Scar. Any Edition Wars that scarred you?
There's the big one, of course. The Great Schism, we might call it, as the behemoth that was the late game 3.5, split down the middle into the 4th edition Pioneers and the Pathfinder Stalwarts, and never did the gaming landscape ever, well, I'm sure people found...
People's Polyhedral United Front and the People's United Polyhedron Front, of course, came out of that. Yeah, it probably one of the hotter edition wars that we've seen in recent times, but certainly not the last.
I like to think I gave 4th edition a fair shot, to be honest. I certainly bought enough of the damn books for the first 2 years, but they never saw use. No one, I was in one 4th ed campaign that lasted about a month and just fizzled out, whereas everyone was going back to 3.5 or onto something like Savage Worlds.
Owen, any good edition wars that you fought in? Brushfire ones or major conflicts?
The big one was always the 3.5 schism. It's defined in some ways elements of the modern era, but there's been some very acrimonious ones. So acrimonious that many RPG discussion sites, Facebook pages, everything, ban edition warring. Like, come down really hard on it because it spirals out of control because people lose their wig on it, completely freak out. Because ultimately there's winners and losers. And ultimately your game goes away and a new one comes in, maybe wearing its face in a slightly uncomfortable fashion. Like, very few games schism badly enough that there's a viable community afterwards. Mostly they happen and the old edition dies. It just goes away. And all the new people who come in keep playing the new edition. But occasionally I've seen them so bad that the fan base remains riven. Like, if you go on and ask people what the right edition of Shadowrun to play is, it's like asking what's the right religion. Everyone will tell you their own favorite one, except that nobody likes 6th Ed. That's about it.
Yeah, second Ed ride or die.
1 to 3 are kind of fairly similar. 4 is very different, and 5 is very different again, and 6 is completely different and generally panned as being terrible. And then there's games that have never done a new edition that are still on their effectively base set with just a few tweaks and revisions. Rifts, Battletech, not the RPG, but the base game, still the same. Yu-Gi-Oh! Never banned a card. Crazy stuff. And it's those changes where there's a winner and a loser, often in a faction-based games where it gets very acrimonious.
Yeah, and unlike a sporting event, there's no chance for them to come back next season. And
no, it's gone. It's gone. And it will probably never get back. That's a key element of the edition war. The problem is that people say, oh no, the gaming police aren't going to take their books. Yeah, but you're not getting any new content for your books ever again.
Well, that was true at a certain point. I'm very much a 4th reprinting of the original Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay over 5th reprinting. The paper stock was much better. They were still Xeroxing from 3rd edition, 3rd reprint, so they were getting much higher fidelity. I jest. It was a famous example of a set of rules that went through many reprints without ever really tweaking anything. Call of Cthulhu, we've had many. I think they're on the 7th edition?
7th edition, yeah.
Yeah, and that game hasn't changed, or it hadn't changed much.
No, like incredibly small changes in definitely 4th, 5th, and 6th. Very, very, very small changes. Incredibly minor stuff. It'll fit on. You get a sheet of A4 paper, and you can write down the changes, and you have most of your sheet of A4 paper left at the end.
For character sheets, you don't see those people wandering around going, "Oh, those third ed guys, get them." It's so edition wars require a very specific sort of set of circumstances, don't they?
A lot of RPG stuff. You see, there's two types of edition changes, really. There's we kind of released an alpha. Let's do a second edition that's actually tidied up with some feedback, which is mostly kind of minor changes and a little bit of shifting around and stuff. And that's where Call of Cthulhu mostly sat. And if you go and look through some RPGs that you'd be shocked on a 6th edition, that a lot of these are pretty incremental minor changes, tidying up some stuff, fixing some broken builds, addressing some minor issues. And then you get big, really big fundamental changes. Like you could look at 1st edition Wolfrup, went a good long time mostly being neglected or not used. And then 2nd edition comes out, produces a vast number of books, a lot of changes, generally reasonably well received, into a very controversial 3rd ed from Fantasy Flight Games, where it stole a bunch of board game elements and card elements and stuck them in a big giant box. Very controversial edition. And then you go to 4th edition, which is an interesting bag of stuff and mostly reasonably well received. So it's interesting, but there are people out there who are lost. There's very few diehard 3rd editions, but there are diehard 2nd edition people going, "God, I hate 4th edition. It's terrible. I want to use 2nd edition instead."
That's interesting. They overlook 3rd.
3rd is so different to most other RPGs that people hate it. If it came out nowadays, it'd be really well received. I think it was literally one that was 10 years ahead of its time.
Yeah, absolutely. That term I would use as well. And it's going to take us a while to cycle back, I think, to discover what's really good about some of those.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the same way that people try and rehabilitate Nixon and Reagan now, you see people talking about 4th ed D&D in a sort of, it wasn't that bad. It's funny, you don't get people going, 3 versus 3.5 D&D. Those guys aren't citing down the crosshairs at each other. Because I think pretty much everyone agreed, well, 3 escaped rather than being released. 3.5 is necessary. So one of the fundamental requirements for an edition war is that both sides think they're right.
Yeah.
There has to be enough of them. And I think, as you pointed out, a fundamental kind of change, a real twist to the dial to make the game something not what it was in some fundamental way. It could be, and we've reflected mostly on the systemic changes that happen between editions, but when a game changes its lore,
oh yeah,
editions, that's another. I mean, in
people
many
hate
ways,
that.
that's an even bigger break.
Well, because the relearning the rules is annoying. People don't like that, but they often accept it as, okay, this is sort of a change for the better. When you start changing the setting information, people get very annoyed because, like, I've internalized that information. The initial reaction of the human brain is to reject any change like that because I don't want to have to relearn that. I've already internalized that. I know what the different tribes of the Garou are called. I don't want to have to relearn 5 of them. You know? I know what they're called.
The word for that is heresy. You're speaking falseness about the truth.
Well, that's it. People don't like people learn stuff. They don't want to relearn. The brain actively resists learning new information. So they're like, okay, I don't want to relearn that. My first response is anger, and particularly if it's done for a reason you think is either silly or you disapprove of, or maybe it's because you know the guy who's writing this. This has been his personal little bugbear that he wants to change. He wants to get it in effect, and it just enrages you that he's doing it. So you start a massive fight with it. I have seen this happen. It's like this person is changing. This person is doesn't like this part of the setting. So he got in to write the stuff and has changed that part of the setting, and I'm going to go to war with him over it.
Scar, if I can't get to him, I'll get to his acolytes.
Absolutely.
Scar, rules changes or setting changes? Which is worse?
In terms of causing wars, I think it might actually be the setting changes that are probably going to be more things. Although, you've seen some pretty rules changes tend to take a while to internalize and really figure out what they're doing to a game. Really, again, I'm biased, but yeah, there's an awful lot of research and insight. This is my OSR bugbear again, but you see an awful lot of people trying to rehabilitate rules from first ed and basic D&D into modern games and putting them into a thing because, as you know, see our previous 2-year series on original Dungeon Master's Guide. The original game designers were not great at communicating why a given rule was put into place, and thus exposing everyone to a Chesterson's fence problem. But that same thing can happen in all kinds of RPGs or other games, where it can take years of hacking away at a game to really get to grips with what's different between it and its previous rule set, and how that changes the flow of a game. You can point at the obvious stuff and the changes between second ed 40k and 10th ed 40k, but to really understand them, we need to play like dozens of matches of both to really get a sense of how they think. So yes, to appreciate those differences takes a while. Whereas lore changes, you can pick those up relatively quickly in the first reading, and you can just go straight from your book to typing it all out onto your forum of choice and going over the differences with everyone and their dog. And it doesn't require the massive diegetic or it doesn't require computational analysis of the kill rates of a space marine or how many rounds to kill the Tarask. It just requires you to start talking about the text that is there. You almost think of like lore changes as the igniter on a edition war, and then the rules changes is more like the firewood that keeps it going.
Look, if I want to get annoyed about the systemic changes, rules changes, I can go to Reddit. They'll have already done that spreadsheet analysis for me. I'll just take my talking points from whoever the Tucker Carlson of of 10th Ed, whatever we're playing is, and go from there. Edition War's gotten sort of more or less heated in the age of social media because I suppose, if we younger listeners, please forgive these old men going on about how they mustard gas the other side. But if we cast our minds back to the hottest of Edition Wars, the 3.5 to 4, social media was. I'm trying to remember. Was it there? Was there any?
Forums were there. It was all done on forums. So the thing was,
You couldn't go onto Twitter and find a complete idiot to argue with.
oh, you could absolutely find a complete idiot, but you had to go into the specific thread to argue with that complete idiot. So what the thing was, on a forum, you might go, why are there 7,000 new posts in the new D&D edition Suxors thread? I suppose maybe I'll go in and look at that. You know what? Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't. Whereas if you scroll through Twitter and you see someone making a stupid ass point that engages the rage center of your brain, you get drawn in immediately. There was exactly the same vitriol back then. It was probably worse because people spent their time on forums. Like, have you ever? Do you remember point by point refutations on forum threads?
Oh
And people
god,
get the series
no.
of point by point
As
refutations.
for my last spell, we got to remember this was in the year of trench warfare. We've since moved on to something with drones and
9,000 word block of text that someone dissects sentence by sentence to counter your points. The souls of true posters. That was the real stuff, guys.
Well, the thing about forums is that very often most forum software would have your list of a given forum avatar has been posting here for 11 years and has made 127,000 posts and has been commendated for their amazing posting 1,400 times. And this is how you would create, your personality, although there was a different word for it in many places. And you would get beefs. You get different people who would every so often, usually they'd be on different sides of the forum and different sub forums. But then, something like Edition War would come along, and these two sumo wrestlers would come charging into the thread and start belly blasting each other, and you'd see everyone else getting crowded out except for the complete newbie who doesn't get it and just keeps trying to make their like 3-word posts in between these 4,000 word long diatribes against each other.
Hillary barrages. Okay, look, I think we've fairly accurately described the noise and fury of edition wars, and we maybe touched upon some of the reasons they happen. Who benefits when we go to war? It's a risky thing for a publisher, a games company, to put out a new edition. It's often a pressure to update rules. It may be a desire to take the setting in a new direction. There could be some other slightly less noble reasons, but who benefits when we go to edition war?
And new editions primarily happen because it's been X years since the previous one. We're out of design space. We're finding it. We've got all these problems that we need to address rules wise, and nothing sells like a new edition. So let's do a new edition. An interesting one is I've watched the chosen lifespan for an RPG is probably around 6 years, maybe up to 10. Of like about 5 6 years, maybe up to 10 years before you really start needing to go back and go, okay, we're gonna start redoing stuff again. We'll release new edition, and that's the lifespan on the bigger games.
Is it predicated in some sense on the volume of releases in that span? Like if you only put out 2 or 3 books, you don't have the same tech debt in terms of
No, but you often still want to do a new edition because you didn't really fully play test it the first time. So you've gotten a lot of feedback since then, or at least some feedback since then. Hey, maybe we'll go make those changes and improve the game. I've seen it happen faster in the cases of particularly poorly received or poorly produced RPGs. Like 3 years later, they're getting a second edition. And that's generally a sign of, oh, major stuff was wrong. We have now fixed it. You guys bought a beta or you guys bought an alpha. But often there is a big financial benefit to launching a new edition. So the usual benefiter is the publisher.
keeps the lights on.
Now, what they don't particularly like is a very controversial new edition. Now, gamers are suckers for Cult of the New, and this is the new hot thing, and they're going to play this, and this will be awesome. But at the same time, you can have people who are very entrenched for one reason or another, and they get very upset about it. I've told the story of the single issue Paladin voter a couple of times because I encountered that during the Pathfinder Second Edition playtest, where one person was posting hundreds of times on the playtest forums, and all he was posting about was the fact that paladins didn't do extra damage from smite. That was the only thing he cared about, and it was core to his conception of paladins. And it just not going back drove him crazy. He just could not handle it, and so there are. That's not necessarily a good thing when you've got to deal with somebody who's wrecking the discussion for everybody else because they're just very, very, very annoyed about the whole thing.
Gar, who do you think benefits when the edition wars heat up?
That's the thing. I don't think the edition war is a struggle for benefit. I think it's a struggle to lose less is the main issue there. It's an emotional response. I've seen this being put again. There's this known psychological thing of humans of loss aversion. The amount that gaining a certain amount of benefit is good for your brain is not proportional to the amount that losing a similar benefit is. It's actually way worse when you lose something. This is again the reason why people hate level drain in D&D so much, because the bad feels from losing your level is way worse than the good feels from gaining a level back. But in this case, people are very afraid of what they're going to lose, and this is in an edition war. What they're losing is often very, ephemeral. Like you said, you quoted earlier the idea that game police are not going to take your books away, but they are kind of taking away the sense that your game is, the vital art. That if they're changing edition and they're changing all your lore, all your stuff, your edition is no longer the locus of people's attention. It's no longer the fulcrum around which the game, the game that you're playing runs. Now, your preferred version of the game is no longer what a person is going to be introduced to, and that's emotionally painful is the wrong word. It's not like it's an injury, although people certainly act like it is.
You're no longer cool.
Yeah, there's a bit of no longer cool, and like there's
People who told you were cool are now telling you you're no longer cool. And seeing as they make the stuff that was cool and now make new stuff that they say is cool, well, that sucks. I was cool, and now I'm not. If anything about this is cool, let me know.
You also find it much harder to recruit new players. If you've got an established group, you're
An older
fine.
edition, yeah.
But you can stick to your old edition. But if you're looking for players, they're like, hey, who wants to come play 3.5 edition D&D? And everyone's on 5th. You're going to have a hard time.
I think, okay, so that takes me right back to something you said at the start, Owen, about, let me see if I can get this right. No one's making stuff for your old edition anymore. And that has broadly been true until now. I can't say for sure that anyone in their right mind is on the DM's Guild banging out D&D 4th Ed content, but you can effectively get, and we call it different things, they're movements rather than editions, but the OSR is effectively making new content for 2nd Ed and before. And I don't know, how have things gone in the Pathfinder community? Can you just use everything from 1st Ed into 2nd Ed, or has there been has been any grumbling?
Oh, there were huge amounts of grumbling initially. A very separate community. Oh no, very separate community. There's some people transferred and a bunch of people have stayed with the first edition, and you got some new people in. So it's two separate blocks now. Now they're not getting a huge amount of stuff, so there's a trickle. But there are so many first edition books that they're generally pretty well supplied with content. So they're not like super stuck. I was talking to one of the guys who's responsible for it. He says, "Look, I've got 700 first edition books. I can sell them out there. Feel hard up for content. And if they bought them all, good on you. I hope you play them all, you know?" And it was so,
The deep silos of
yeah,
old
basically.
ammunition that is working just fine, thank you very
I've
much.
got tons of content there if you want to use it. But it's hard to recruit. That's the big difference. You've gotten some trickle over, but there was hardcore people who were saying, I'm not shifting. And I'm like, that's fair enough. One of the things that Pathfinder does that's relatively nice is that they have several online repositories with all the rules for free. So it's like, oh, I can't get the first edition rulebook anymore. You don't need a first edition rulebook. Go and you can still get the PDF you want. You can go just onto go onto D20 PFSRD, or you can go on to Archives and Ethos and just read the stuff there. It's all there.
Yeah. I've actually found that the first ed SRD stuff was way easier to read than the second ed SRD stuff. There's an awful lot of things that I find confusing with second ed that I would probably need a rule book if I really wanted to drill down into.
One of the things that sort of prompted me to want to talk about this is the huge amount of coverage that's been going on around Warhammer 40,000, the tabletop battle game, where superhumans, transmutants, and elder gods take to the local golf course and beat seven shades of snotlings out of each other. They're about to go. They're into their 10th edition push now, and first of all, they're making a big deal about. I don't know when the last edition was. It was presumably ninth.
2 years ago, I think. Hold
2
on.
or 3 years, I'd
2 or
say.
3 years,
Yeah.
and they've kind of more or less said we're going to be doing this more often. We're going to expect a new edition every 3 years. Now, last time I seriously played 40k was in 2nd edition, so I'm closer to the T-Rex than Miley Cyrus or something like that. And I had no idea what happened in between. I heard rumors of something about armor penetration, and I was like, I have no idea what that means. It's a different language as far as I'm concerned, a fundamentally different war game. So not something I'm about to jump back into. But cast yourselves forward 3 years down the line. Now, one of the things they seem to have done, which is, I think, an effort to get around this, and as you point out, Owen, make the rules, your new edition, make it free, or make it available somewhere that's easy to reference. I believe 10th edition rules for 40k are being released for free.
Yeah, in a big change. Big change.
You'd usually go out and buy that inch thick battle, rules of battle, and then you'd need a codex for whatever army. And depending on the faction you fall in love with, you could be waiting quite a while for a new codex. And if you want new models for certain factions, you might have gone literally from cradle to corporate employment before new models are released.
Didn't the Dark Eldar go like 3 editions without a new codex one time?
I believe they've been in that sort of position.
Yeah, they've been there. Tyranids had the same problem or similar problems.
But then I suppose what you're opening up then is, instead of edition wars, you sort of settle in for a forever war, always changing. We're always going to be updating. And I mentioned 40k in this respect because it seems that they would like to shift away. They cannot keep up with the need for a new codex in each edition for each faction. There are many. So instead, I think they've thrown in the towel and gone, right, well, we'll update the data sheets online. We're giving you the rules for free. For goodness sake, buy the models, and we'll still be rolling in it because it's GW, Games Workshop. But we're seeing the same sort of move now in the big role-playing spaces. The one D&D is this attempt not to say they're having a new edition, and it's kind of interesting to watch them try and tiptoe through the minefield.
You see, I think part of the thing that happened to 40K was that because they had some production delays for printed product, like they print all their minis in the UK, but they print their books in China. So the issue with getting the codexes in, some of the codexes were heavily delayed, and because they're marching on to 10th edition, I think the Guard 9th edition codex was relevant for like 3 months.
Ouch.
And it's just because it got delayed a couple of months, and that, and they're like, okay, well, I think that made them reconsider some options. They're still going to do codexes. They will still release a codex. You can buy a codex if you want, but it's no longer going to be kind of, you need to buy your codex. It's like, yeah, you can get the rules online. You can buy codex if you want. And a lot of people will.
With their focus on balancing around the competitive scene,
Yes.
that'll
Big
change
change.
very
Big
rapidly,
change.
which is ironic because the amount of people who, I think I saw some back of the envelope episode estimate was 50% of GW or fans of a GW game collect the models and follow the lore. 50% actually play the game, and of that 50%, maybe 10% play competitively. So really, they're changing the rules all the time to suit a very small subsection.
Absolutely. But it's a very powerful subset. It drives a lot of other content, and it drives a lot of stuff happening. Those people, the crazy people who kind of go and play tournaments and stuff and want to practice all the time, they're actually they're disproportionately valuable as players because they are always in the local gaming shop looking for a game, so that they're an additional driver of what happens. The hardcore guys are more valuable than you'd think. They're more valuable per their weight. They spend more money as well.
But they're a very small portion. So, I
Yeah,
mean, what are you doing here? They're businesses, so they've appealed to their most valuable customers, and they're valuable in many different ways, but very importantly, economically. They're a linchpin for the whole process. Do we see the same thing in our favorite tabletop role-playing games, or are we likely to encounter something similar? I mean, I'm just fascinated by watching the higher-ups in WotC, Wizards of the Coast, try and explain how this isn't a new edition, despite the fact that there's massive playtest going on that is changing everything. What do we think of that? Is this sort of Emperor's New Clothes territory?
So some people decided that reality is optional, and that you just say stuff enough, and some people, a percentage of people will believe it. So there's always that going on. It's not new edition. It's not new edition. It's not new edition. And some people will repeat that line for you. So you can get away with it. You can fool some of the people all the time, and all the people some of the time, and that's what we're at. It's rubbish, but whatever. They don't want there's a new edition coming out and then it gets compared to the old edition. They don't want that to happen
Yeah.
because they can't. Fifth Ed couldn't be more accepted. They can only go down on Sixth Ed, so they don't want to say it's Sixth Ed. The second they say it's Sixth Ed, it's compared to Fifth Ed. And more pertinently, someone can fork and build their own Fifth Ed continuation and say, come play my game instead. And there's enough people with enough reach that they might be able to chip off a section of fan base. They don't want that. They don't want there to be an existence of another option.
You're thinking about sort of large social media influencers, be it on
Yeah.
YouTube or elsewhere.
Critical Role, or Coville decides, okay, we're releasing this new Fifth Ed fork, and come play this. It's great.
Are they the new, even more rarefied strain? They're not just that they're super dedicated and into it, but they're also super visible.
They have a following. An unhealthily socialized fan base that will follow them wherever they go. They don't want that to happen again. They're probably quite worried about that happening again. And they don't want the negative press that is the comparison to Fifth Ed versus Sixth Ed.
So it's fair to say that the last edition wars were fought with forums and social media. The next big edition war, the really hot one, will be fought with YouTube influencers and Instagram and TikToks.
Do you think we're already seeing lines being drawn?
I don't know. I think the whole orc, and I've already forgotten what we called that crisis at the start of the year. The new open gaming license. I think that might have been, that's sort of like Franz Ferdinand getting shot somewhere.
Hmm.
It speaks to a very volatile community who are just itching for reasons to kick off, and you best not be the one to give them one. Edition wars. Okay, let's wrap it up at this point. I'm not going to take us any further down that dark path. Look, they can be quite entertaining in their own way. These are, after all, just the games we play. It's only life and death on the keyboard. It is unlike the console wars. Raymond Chandler said it best. The books are still on the shelf. They're fine. So whatever your favorite edition is, if you can get enough like-minded souls, goodness, we still see people playing that vampire trading card game even today. I don't think there's been any.
Yeah, Vitas is still going.
Is it? Hold on, they're still releasing cards for that.
Yeah, there is still content made for it.
Respect to those people.
One of the complications is that Renegade release a spiritual successor game that's quite similar. It's not identical, but it's quite similar. Vampire Rivals, but use the same iconography and stuff, So it,
Oh, so you could slip a couple of in and the uninitiated wouldn't know.
yeah, it's a bit weird. It's like, wait, that's the symbol for protein, that's symbol for potence, and they're in the same triangles they used to be in Vitas. Ooh, what?
We're off into weird and wild territory. We might do a Bush Wars edition of this. Scar, what is the next great edition war coming? Are we post edition wars at this point?
Well, here's the thing about the end of history, as we call it. We all thought that war was over in the 1990s, and turned out that wars got more dragged out, less public, and messier. And in today's social media landscape, it's harder to say that we're really. Conflict still seems to be there, but it doesn't necessarily show itself publicly with the sumo wrestlers striding into their communities. People just tend to snipe at each other from their own. It's not that there's fight within the community. It's that they split into their own sub communities and then like throw lawn darts at each other, essentially across the Reddits. Drone strikes of internet vitriol.
What a marvelously evocative theme subject this has been. The imagery for this is wild. We live in fraught time.
You want to see an edition war?
Go.
Wait till they reboot the MCU in 2 years.
Folks, it's been wild, fantastic. Please join us on our Discord. Send your hate mail too. Yeah, I happen to think you're right, but that's probably that is a subject for a different podcast, which we should probably start if we can find the time. We have, it should be noted, of course, everybody who's listening, all you fantastically avid and even sporadic fans and listeners, that we have many, many episodes under our belt, but it's still the first season of the Adventuring Party. Long may that continue.
Those weren't rules changes, those were just errata.
Yeah, the hats, the personalities change. The war continues. On that note, let's do a general. Should we do a casting call? If you're interested in coming on board, we'd love to hear new voices. You can contact us on our Discord. We record sporadically as the vagaries of schedules allows. But if you think you could contribute something to the conversation, please come to our Discord where we do our recording without any need for fancy tech. You just need a microphone and a hot opinion, and talk to us, and we'll see what we can set up. Owen, I'm going to give you the final word on Edition Wars before we wrap up.
The final word in Edition Wars.
No one gets to jump in after. You're going to do the party over thing.
Ooh.
Go for it.
You really stuck me in the quick here.
You're ready. I know you're ready.
Wolfram Third Edition was the most lethal version of Wolfram. Every other version is soft in comparison. Good night.
There we go. Okay, you got to say it though. We can't leave.
This party's over.
Thanks for listening to the Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY. or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, linked in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike on version 3 license.